Now we'll be solving quadratic equations by the third method. The third method is completing the square. In completing the square, you make sure that you actually get a square term or a perfect square term, and from there you'll be able to solve things. So let me explain what I mean by this. You have x squared plus 3x minus 10 which is equal to 0. You need to make sure that these two terms actually become a perfect square. A perfect square is a number that has its own root as a factor. So for example, if you have 25, that gives you 5 times 5. So 25 is a perfect square. So suppose if you also have x minus 4, the whole thing squared, x minus 4 is actually the factor of this. So x minus 4 into x minus 4 gives you x minus 4 squared. Therefore this is a perfect square, because if you square root it, both the solutions are the same. So you need to make this equation in form of a perfect square in order for you to solve it. So let's try this. You have a, b and c from the general format of a quadratic equation. Now this is how you do it. The first step is to make sure a is equal to 1. You need to make sure a will be equal to 1 for any case. So suppose if I was given 3x squared plus 5x plus 2, just for reference, you need to make sure the coefficient of a or the value of a is 1, but in this case it's 3, so you need to actually factorize things out. So you take the 3 outside, x squared plus 5 over 3x plus 2. Now notice that in completing the square method, you essentially leave out c. Don't work with c, only work with a and b. So for this one, you have 3 into x squared, which gives you 3x squared, plus 5 over 3x times 3, which is 5x. So you need to make sure that the coefficient of x squared is actually 1. Then you deal with the bracket. You forget about this 3. Deal with the bracket. So let's do this. So we need to make sure a is equal to 1. It is. So we can go ahead. The second step will be to divide b by 2 and then square it. So what do I mean by this? The value of b is 3. 3 divided by 2 is just 3 over 2 or 1.5, and then you square it. 3 over 2, the whole thing squared, gives you 9 over 4. So you need to make sure you have these two things. You divide b by 2 and you square it. The reason you do this is to make sure you get a perfect square. Therefore you complete the square. So let's rewrite this equation now. So you've got x squared plus 3x. Now you divided it by 2 to get 3 over 2. Then you squared it to get 9 over 4. So this one is what you're going to use. So plus 9 over 4 minus 9 over 4 minus 10 equal to 0. Now you added the 9 over 4. Therefore the result of the equation changes, but you subtract it to neutralize the fact that you added this. So if you compute this, you're actually going to get 0, which is the same as x squared plus 3x minus 10. Now make sure this is also a particular format for this. You need to divide b by 2 and then you square it, then you add those things up. So you divided b by 2, 3 divided by 2, you squared it to get 9 over 4. You add 9 over 4, you subtract 9 over 4 to neutralize for that effect. Now then you look at the next step of the question, and that is you need to first get a perfect square. So when you get the perfect square, you'll need to look at the first 3 terms and make a perfect square. You look at these 3 terms. That's the first 3 terms. You get a perfect square out of them. This is actually x plus 3 over 2 squared. Notice why we kept this thing. This thing will help us to get the perfect square. So therefore I've just substituted it back here to get x plus 3 over 2 squared. If you don't think this is the case, you can expand it and you'll actually get the same answer. So you have x plus 3 over 2 squared minus 9 over 4 minus 10 equal to 0. Now what else can we do from here? We have x plus 3 over 2 squared equal to minus 9 over 4 minus 10. And if I move the minus 9 over 4 minus 10 to the other side, I actually get 49 over 4. This minus 9 over 4 minus 10 is equal to minus 49 over 4. And because I move it to the other side, it becomes positive. Now I'm able to square root. When I square root, I need to make sure these numbers are perfect squares. So for example, for 49, you have 7 times 7. Hence, it's a perfect square. For 4, you have 2 times 2, hence that is also a perfect square. So you need to make sure this happens, and the way how you make sure this happens is implicitly by doing this step. Step 2 is actually the most important step. You divide b by 2, you square it, and you get this longer equation, and from there it's easy. You look at the first 3 terms and you make a perfect square out of that, and then you'll see that you end up with another number that's also a perfect square. So when you square root them, you get x plus 3 over 2, because this is x plus 3 over 2 squared, and if you square root it, you get the same thing. So that's x plus 3 over 2 equal to 7 over 2. 49 over 4, if you square root that, you get 7 over 2. Now, also you need to know that if you square root a number, you actually get 2 values. So suppose if you have the square root of 4, you actually get plus 2 or minus 2, because 2 squared gives you 4, but minus 2 squared also gives you 4. So you have plus 2 or minus 2. So therefore you have plus 7 over 2 or minus 7 over 2. In mathematics, you can write plus 2 or minus 2 as plus minus 2. So that's the same thing which I've applied here. Therefore, your values of x is equal to 7 over 2 minus 3 over 2 or minus 7 over 2 minus 3 over 2. So you have both scenarios here. And if I were to just compute this, this is 4 over 2, which is the same as 2, or minus 10 over 2, or the same as minus 5. So this is how you use the complete the square to solve a quadratic equation. Let's recap. So first, you make sure that the coefficient of a, or the coefficient of x squared, is equal to 1. You need to make sure a is equal to 1. And if it's not, like the case here, you factorize things out and you only focus on a and b. Only focus on a and b. That's one thing you need to make sure in completing the square method. So you need to focus on a and b, you need to factorize things out, and you make sure that a is equal to 1. From there on, you can do the same thing. You get your b and then you divide it by 2. So in this case, b is equal to 5 over 3. You divide it by 2 and then you square it. Then you get a longer equation. Then you look at the first 3 terms of this equation and you make a perfect square out of that. And the way how you get this number is by getting b over 2. So this helps if you do b over 2. So you get this. You put the remaining terms back. You compute them, and then you get and then you square root them. Once you square root them, you're going to be able to get a simpler form of the equation. And when you get the simpler form of the equation, just take like terms on one side, and you get your values of x.